الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, today will be day one of us starting our discussion around the Prophet ﷺ and how he was in the month of Ramadan. So we're going to take a look at the behavior of the Prophet ﷺ with a lot of things. How the Prophet ﷺ interacted with the Qur'an, how he interacted with his companions, how he interacted with this, all in the month of Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. So as we are, I want you guys, especially the sisters in the back, to be mindful of, others that are there trying to listen to the class. Please be mindful of that as we are recording, and we don't want to infringe on others that came out to listen to the lecture, inshallah. So today, inshallah ta'ala, day one, we'll start with the Prophet ﷺ and his relationship with the Qur'an in Ramadan. This is very important because the month of Ramadan is the month of the Qur'an. And كان جبريل عليه السلام يلقى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كل ليلة في رمضان يعرض عليه القرآن وفي العام الذي توفي فيه عارضه جبريل القرآن مرتين. The Jibreel used to come and visit the Prophet ﷺ every night in Ramadan. Every night in Ramadan, Angel Jibreel would come down and visit the Prophet ﷺ. This is happening every single night in Ramadan. And as he's coming to visit the Prophet ﷺ, he's reviewing the Qur'an that has been revealed to him already during the month of Ramadan. And he would do this every night in every Ramadan, with the exception of the last Ramadan, which Angel Jibreel came down twice in that year, because that was the same year that the Prophet ﷺ passed away, leaving, a hole in the Muslim community that would last forever. Ramadan is the month of the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, ayat 185. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس. That the month of Ramadan is the month of the Qur'an, the month in which the Qur'an was revealed as a guidance for all of mankind. عن أوس ابن حذيفة قال خدمنا على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في وفد ثقيف فنزلت أحلاف على مغيرة ابن شعبة وأنزل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بني مالك في قبة له وكان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كل ليلة يأتينا بعد العشاء يحدثنا قائما على رجليه حتى يراوح بين رجليه من طول القيام فأكثر ما يحدثنا ما لقي من قومه قريش. Aus ibn Hudhayfa, he said that I, along with a group from the area of Thaqif, which is the area of Ta'if, all right, I and a group of my tribesmen from the tribe of Thaqif, from the area of Ta'if, we came to Medina to visit the Prophet ﷺ. This is all happening in Ramadan. We came to visit the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. And so a group of our tribe stayed with Mughira ibn Shurba, while the Prophet ﷺ put another group of us in another home that he had put to the side for us. And we stayed there. And the Prophet ﷺ, every night, he would come and visit us after he prayed Salatul Isha in the masjid. So he would pray Salatul Isha in the masjid, and then he would go to this particular place that he housed them at to go visit them and talk to them about Islam, talk to them about the Qur'an. Aus ibn Hudhayfa, he said, the Prophet ﷺ would sit down on his legs, would sit down like on his knees, and he would lean to one side and sometimes to the other side because of sitting for such a long period of time. And most of what he would tell us or narrate to us during that time was what he experienced from Quraysh. He would say to us, لا سواء يعني حالنا اليوم ليس كحالنا في السابق. He said that we are not the same, meaning the Muslim community, we are not the same. Meaning, when we were in Mecca, we were mustada'afin. We were weak, we were oppressed. And the Meccans, they used to take advantage of us. But when we migrated to Medina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us strength, gave us a little bit of authority. And so that the wars that go on between us now are not the same as they used to be before. Before they used to oppress us. We weren't even allowed to fight. He said, but when we migrated to Medina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us permission to fight. And so, al-harbu baynana wa baynahum nudawilu alayhim wa yudawilu alayna. He said that the war between us is kind of equal. Sometimes we would win against them, and sometimes they would win against us. This is the Prophet ﷺ conveying this to Aus ibn Hudhayfa as him and a group is coming from Ta'if. They are new Muslims. They are newly converted to Islam, and they're coming to Medina to hear from the Prophet ﷺ. So he said that the war between us is not like it used to be. Sometimes we win, sometimes they win. فَلَمَّا خَرَجْنَا إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ كَانَتْ سِجَالُ الْحَرْبُ بَيْنَنَا. That, once we left Medina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us strength, gave us power, so therefore we were not on the same level. He said, فَلَمَّا كَانَتْ اللَّيْلَ أَبْطَأَ عَنِ الْوَقْتِ الَّذِي كَانَ يَأْتِينَ فِيهِ. So, Os, he says, the next night, when the Prophet ﷺ was supposed to come to us, we noticed he didn't show up. He didn't come to us at the time that he usually comes to us. So he would pray Salatul Isha in the masjid, and then he would come to the house where they were housed at. And he would come visit them and teach them about Islam. He said, but this particular night, the Prophet ﷺ delayed his coming. He didn't come at the time that he was supposed to. He said, فَقُلْنَا لَقَدْ أَبْطَعْتَ عَنَّا اللَّيْلَ. Then when the Prophet ﷺ finally came, we said to him, this is not the usual time you came to us. Before you used to come to us at this time, but you delayed your time. And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّهُ طَرَأَ عَلَيَّ حِزْبِي مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ فَكَرِهْتُ أَنْ أَجِيءَ حَتَّى أُتِمَّهُ. He said, Jibreel came to me faj'atan, out of nowhere. I wasn't prepared for him to come at this time, but Jibreel came to me to recite with me my hizb, my section of the Qur'an for the night. He said, and I hated to, end my session with Jibreel and come to you guys at the time that I usually come to you. So I delayed my time coming to you so I could stay with Jibreel and finish my hizb. Pay attention to the word, my hizb of the Qur'an, my section of the Qur'an. And also he said, Sa'altu ashab Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. I asked some of the companions, how was the Qur'an broken up into hizb, sections? So in the Qur'an there are juz, there are hizbs or ahzab, and then there are ruba'. So a juz is 30 parts. There are 30 juz in the Qur'an, right? 30 juz in the Qur'an. There are 20 pages per juz, as we said. Every 20 pages is one juz. So if you're going to complete the whole Qur'an in 30 days, then that means that you would read how many pages per salat? There are 5 salat a day. 5 goes into 20, 4 times. That means that if you were going to complete a juz a day, you would have to read 4 pages after every salat. And I'm talking about in Arabic, because the Qur'an is not broken down like that in English. This is in Arabic. So if you were going to read an entire juz a day, you would have to read 4 pages after every salat. 5 salat a day, 4 pages after every salat. By the end of the day, you've completed 20 pages. That's your juz for the day. Which means if you did that for 30 days, you would complete the entire Qur'an in an entire month. However, within that juz, the juz is broken down even further into what are called a hizb. H-A-Z-I-B, or hizb. Or H-I-Z-B, hizb. A hizb is a section. For every juz, there are 2 hizbs in the juz. There are 2 sections, meaning every juz is broken down into 2 sections. So that means that if there are 30 juz, then how many hizb are there in the Qur'an? There are 2 hizb per juz. Then how many hizb are there in the Qur'an? 60. Fine, there's 60 hizb. Each hizb is broken down into quarters, which is known as a ruba', a quarter. There are 4 quarters in a hizb, 2 hizbs in a juz. 30 juz in the Qur'an. Is that too much? You got it? Huh? Break it down for me. Run it back. How many juz in the Qur'an? 30. 30 juz in the Qur'an. How many hizb is in a juz? 2 hizb. How many hizb in the Qur'an? 60. Each hizb has 4 quarters, known as a ruba', right? The reason why the scholars break the Qur'an down like this is because it makes it easy for you to read your section or portion of the Qur'an for the day. So if you were calculating how much of the Qur'an you're going to read a day, you would do it by ruba', or you would do it by quarters, or you would do it by section, or you would do it by juz, depending on how much you wanted to read. You guys follow me? So the Prophet ﷺ, he said to Aus, the reason that delayed me from coming to you at the time that I usually came to you is because Jibreel came to me so that I could read my hizb, my section of the Qur'an for the day. And I didn't want to come to you before I completed my session with Angel Jibreel. So the scholars, they extract from this that the breaking down of the Qur'an into these different sections, it makes it easy for a person to read his portion or his share of the Qur'an on a daily basis. That means that every Muslim should have their daily portion of the Qur'an that you read. Whether that is a ruba', whether that is a hizb, or whether that is a juz. Depending on where you are. If you're going to read a juz a day, then you're going to complete the Qur'an in 30 days. If you're going to read a hizb a day, 1 section a day, then you're going to complete the Qur'an in how many days? Too much math for y'all. 60 days. 60 days. It's going to take you a little bit longer. Guys, follow me. No, it would be longer than 60 days because it's 2 hizb per juz. So it will be how many days? 120 days. 120 days. So if you were reading 2 hizb a day, then you would complete it in 60 days. Well, no. You're right. You're actually right. You're right. Because if you read 2 hizb a day, that's a juz. So half of a juz would be 60 days. You're absolutely right. I was wrong. All right. So if you were reading 1 hizb a day, then you would complete the Qur'an in 60 days. And if you were reading, and there's 4 ruba', 4 quarters to a hizb. So if you were reading 1 quarter a day, and then you do the math. That's a little bit too much for me. You deal with math on a daily basis, so you know. So if you were going to read, so what you have to do is for every person, you should have your portion of the Qur'an that you read on a daily basis. Whatever that portion is. Whether that is a quarter of a juz, that's a half of a juz, or an entire juz. Wherever you are, whatever your life allows you. Some of us have extremely busy lives. However, when you look at the Prophet ﷺ here, you can see that he wanted to finish his section of the Qur'an with Jibreel before he came to entertain his guests. That means that he prioritized the Qur'an. I need to finish this. I get home from work. I don't immediately turn the TV on. I don't immediately go, even if I put the food on as a woman, you put the food on to cook. Let me go sit on the couch. Let me read my quarter of the Qur'an, my ruba' of the Qur'an for today. But that takes commitment. And it takes sacrifice, because that means that you're going to have to put some stuff on the back burner. Phone call come in, you say, well, I'll call this person back. I have to finish my ruba'. I have to finish my hizb of the Qur'an for today. Or I'm right at the end of finishing my juz for today. Let me finish my juz for today. This is your relationship with the Qur'an. And so what the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us in this hadith is that not just in Ramadan, but even outside of Ramadan, because Ramadan is where we create the habit. Outside of Ramadan is where we maintain the habit. We're creating habits in Ramadan, brothers and sisters. We're creating habits with the salat, habits with the Qur'an, habits with our character, habits with, giving sadaqahs. We're creating habits in Ramadan. Outside of Ramadan, after Ramadan is over, is how we're going to maintain those habits until the next Ramadan comes around. And then we add more habits. And after, 5, 6, 7 Ramadans, you've become a completely different person with a completely different set of behaviors and practices that you've developed over a period of time. This is self-development. This is what fasting in the month of Ramadan is all about. Developing habits. Unfortunately for many, we develop habits in Ramadan, and then after Ramadan is over, we give those habits up. And as I said yesterday, this is what is blameworthy about the Ramadan Muslim. It's not blameworthy to retreat to Islam in Ramadan. There's nothing wrong with that. What is blameworthy about the Ramadan Muslim is that you develop all of these great habits in Ramadan, and then soon Ramadan is over, you abandon them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves consistency. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَحَبُّ أَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. The most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those that are done consistently, even if they're small. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just small things, but you do it consistently. You guys follow me? Am I making sense? So, and subhanAllah, I remember a narration where one of the students came to spend the night with Imam Ahmed. One of his students came to spend the night with him. And Imam Ahmed, after they prayed Salatul Isha, Imam Ahmed bought the student, they're fine. Imam Ahmed bought the student a cup of water and left him with a cup of water. When Imam Ahmed went to get him for Salatul Fajr, he noticed that the cup of water was still there. He noticed that the cup of water was still sitting on the table. So he asked the student, why didn't you use the cup of water that I gave you? And he said to Imam Ahmed, because I wasn't thirsty. Imam Ahmed said, subhanAllah, I didn't leave you the water for you to drink. I left you the water for you to make wudu and get up at night and pray. Talibul ilm wa laysa laka wirdu min al-layl. You are a student of knowledge and you don't have a portion of the night that you get up and recite Qur'an. How are you a student of knowledge? As a student of knowledge, it's not just about seeking knowledge of the religion, but also practical application of what you're learning. Preparing your heart to receive the information that you're learning. How do you soften your heart? You soften your heart with the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. If I was to reveal this Qur'an down on the biggest mountain that you see, if I was to send this Qur'an down on a mountain, it would turn the mountain to powder, dust. That's how powerful the Qur'an is. If that's what the Qur'an can do to a mountain, jamid, this inanimate object, then what could the Qur'an do to the heart of someone who says they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have accepted the Qur'an as their book, as their guide? What should the Qur'an do to your heart? You're a student of knowledge and you don't get up and have a section of the Qur'an that you read at night? How are you a student of knowledge? And so Imam Ahmed was teaching the student a valuable lesson that your seeking knowledge is not just all, taking in the information that you're learning about the deen, but also softening your heart so that when you receive the information, it penetrates. It penetrates the heart. Subhanallah al-Azim, as a student of knowledge, like I always wondered why you see certain students and their behavior and their character is harsh and hard-hearted and disrespectful. And it's just like, but you're a student of knowledge. Why isn't the knowledge that you're learning about the deen penetrating your heart? Why isn't it penetrating? Why don't we see the manifestations of all this great knowledge that you have? Why don't we see the manifestation of it in your character? Because the heart hasn't been prepared. They're just retaining information, but they're retaining it with a heart that has some challenges. You got to soften the heart first. Make sure the ground is fertile. So the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith is showing us his relationship with the Qur'an in Ramadan. His relationship with the Qur'an in Ramadan. So what is your section? What is your portion of the Qur'an that you're reading? So Aus ibn Hudhayfa, he says, سألت أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم كيف تحزبون القرآن. He said, I asked the companions of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, how do you section up the Qur'an? How do you break the Qur'an up into sections? قالوا ثلاث وخمس وسبع وتسع وإحدى عشر وثلاث عشر وحزب مفصل وحدة. He said, we break the Qur'an up into thirds, a third of the Qur'an, which is from Surah Al-Baqarah all the way up into Surah An-Nisa. That's a third of the Qur'an. 1/3 of the Qur'an. From Surah Al-Baqarah to Surah Al-Nisa. Or 1/5 of the Qur'an, which is from Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah number 5 to Surah Al-Tawbah. That's a 1/5 of the Qur'an. Or a 7th of the Qur'an, which is Surah Yunus, Surah 10, all the way to Surah Al-Hijr, Surah number 15. Or the 11th, or in 11 sections, which is from Surah number 16 to Surah number 25, Surah to Furqan. Or 13 parts, which is from Surah to Safat, Surah number 37 to Surah 49. And then Al-Hizb al-Mufassal, the shorter surahs of the Qur'an, which starts from Surah Al-Qaf, Surah number 50, all the way up to the end of the Qur'an. That are called a Surah Mufassal. These are not too long, not too short surahs, starting from Surah number 50 all the way to the end of the Qur'an. So, and it's important to know that, because when Aisha was asked, what is the distance between the suhoor of the Prophet ﷺ and the adhan of Fajr? She said the time that it takes to read 30 ayats from the Mufassal, from Surah number 50 to the end of the Qur'an. How long would it take for you to recite 30 ayats from that? Roughly. About 15, 20 minutes. 15, 20 minutes. That's the time between the adhan and the suhoor of the Prophet ﷺ. You want to eat suhoor closer to the time of the adhan. Not too far behind, so that your body begins to absorb all of the nutrients in the food. So by the time the adhan is called, you're probably hungry again. You don't want to wake an hour, 2 hours ahead. Then you're going to be hungry again. Delay your suhoor all the way up into the time of the adhan. Inshallah ta'ala. So then he starts to mention some of the virtues of the Qur'an. لَقَدْ قَرَنَ النَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ بَيْنَ الصِّيَامِ وَالْقُرْآنِ. There is a very unique connection between fasting and the Qur'an. Very unique connection between fasting and the Qur'an. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned in this authentic hadith, الصِّيَامِ وَالْقُرْآنِ يَشْفَعَانِ لِلْعَبْدِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. That your fasting and the Qur'an will intercede for you on the Day of Judgment. We talked about this yesterday or the day before about people being in the hellfire and having people or things to intercede for them. Here the Prophet ﷺ said, your fasting and the Qur'an will intercede for you Yawm al-Qiyamah. Meaning, if you are about to be punished in the hellfire, your fasting will come and argue on your behalf. The Qur'an will come and argue on your behalf. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me, how that looks. No one knows how that looks. We just know the Prophet ﷺ said it, and we believe in it. If someone would have said that there would have been a cell phone that talks to you 20 years ago, we would have said you are crazy. You're Majnoon. Right? Even with technological advancements, we're being shown the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things that we could have never imagined. If you would have told the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba that there will come a time where people will be flying airplanes, they would have probably looked at you like maybe not the Prophet ﷺ, but others would have probably looked at you like you were crazy. So technological advancement shows us the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he said that the Qur'an and your fasting will intercede on your behalf Yawm al-Qiyamah. يقول الصوم ربي إني منعته الطعام والشراب بالنهار. Your fasting will come to Allah and say, oh Allah, I prevented him from eating and drinking during the day. فَشَفِّعْ فِيهِ. So let me intercede for him. Meaning, if he's going to the hellfire, then let me intercede with you on his behalf that you don't punish him. Subhanallah. This is your fasting. This is your fasting. Asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not to punish you. That means invest in your fasting. While you're fasting, pour into your fasting, because everything that you pour into your fasting is going to turn around and be a benefit for you Yawm al-Qiyamah. وَيَقُولُ الْقُرْآنِ. The Qur'an will say on the Day of Judgment, رَبِّي مَنَعْتُهُ النَّوْمِ بِاللَّيْلِ فَشَفِّعْنِي فِيهِ فَيَشْفَعَنِي. And the Qur'an will come to Allah and say, oh Allah, I stopped him from sleeping at night. because he used to get up and recite me. I stopped him from sleeping at night because he used to get up and recite me. So let me intercede on his behalf, Yawm al-Qiyamah. However, how is the Qur'an going to intercede for you if you don't have a relationship with it? You never read it. You never acted upon it. You never tried to understand it. You never had a relationship with the Qur'an. How is the Qur'an going to intercede for you Yawm al-Qiyamah? Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned in a very beautiful passage, he said, Hajar al-Qur'an anwa'. How people boycott the Qur'an is broken down into different categories. And this is a time for self-reflection for all of us. Take a moment, ponder over what I'm about to mention from Ibn al-Qayyim about your abandonment of the Qur'an and find out what category you fit in and fix it today. He said, Hajr al-Qur'an anwa'. Boycotting the Qur'an happens in a number of different ways. Ahaduha, one of them, the first, is Hajr al-Sama'ihi wal-Iman bihi wal-Isgha' ilayhi. Boycotting the Qur'an by not listening to it, believing in it, and focusing on it when it's being recited. These are people who play the Qur'an or hear the Qur'an being recited, and this is for many of our youth during Taraweeh, the Qur'an is being recited, they're sitting in the back on their cell phones, having conversations. I get it, maybe you don't feel like, praying this rak'ah or that rak'ah, but then don't sit on the musalla and have a full-out conversation while the imam is reciting the Qur'an. If you're going to have a conversation, go sit in your car. Go use the phone, get in the car. But I'm not going to sit in the masjid and have a conversation while the imam is reciting the Qur'an. This is considered Hajar al-Qur'an, boycotting the Qur'an, abandoning the Qur'an. And we've made a habit of doing this in the Muslim community. Taraweeh is going on, the imam is reciting the Qur'an, and we're sitting in the back having our conversations. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. So not listening to it, not believing in it, and not turning our attention towards it. Number two, Hajar al-amal bihi wal-wukuf inda halalihi wa haramihi wa in qara'ahu wa amana bi. The second way that a person abandons the Qur'an is that he doesn't act upon it. He doesn't stop at what is halal. He doesn't stop at what is haram, even though he recites it and believes in it. I think all of us at some point, whether some greater, some less, fall into that particular category. All of us at some point or on some level fall into that category. Number two, Hajar al-Qur'an by not, or boycotting the Qur'an, abandoning the Qur'an by not acting upon it. Even though you read it, even though you believe in it. You know that this is halal, yet, or something that is wajib, and you don't do it. And you know that something is haram, and you still do it anyway. And everything that he's mentioning here is going to infringe on the Qur'an interceding on your behalf, Yawm al-Qiyamah. How is the Qur'an going to intercede on your behalf when you didn't read it, you didn't recite it, you didn't pay attention to it, you didn't study it, you didn't act upon it, and then you want the Qur'an to come Yawm al-Qiyamah and say, oh, Allah, don't punish him? Not going to happen. You got to better your relationship with the Qur'an if you want it to intercede for you. Number three, from the categories of people who boycott the Qur'an or abandon the Qur'an, Hajra tadabburihi wa tafahumihi wa ma'rifati ma arada al-mutakallam bihi minhu, is boycotting pondering and reflecting on the Qur'an. You don't ponder and reflect on your eyes. You don't stop for a moment and say, wow, that's deep. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here is deep. Pondering for a moment and reflecting on the Qur'an and understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually wants from you as you recite these ayats. So you read it, you believe in it, you might even act on it, but you don't ponder, you don't stop to ponder and reflect on the depth of the Qur'an. Number five, هجر الاستشفاع والتداوي به في جميع أمراء القلب وأدوائها ويطلب شفاء دائه من غيره ويهجر التداوي به. Number five is that the person boycotts or abandons seeking the shifa, the healing that is in the Qur'an for the many diseases in the heart. This is 4? Okay, so let me run through it again. The first one was abandoning listening to it, believing in it, and focusing on it. That's all 1. Number 2 is abandoning acting upon it and stopping at the halal and the haram, even though you recite it and believe in it. Number 3 is abandoning. Oh, okay, I forgot number 3. Number 3 was hajra tahkimihi wa tahakumi ilayhi fi usul ad-din wa furu'i. Number 3 was abandoning using the Qur'an as your judge in all of the matters in your life. That the Qur'an is not the judge in all matters of your life. Meaning you don't reference the Qur'an when you decide on the matter, whether this is halal, haram, should I do it, should I not do it. You don't turn to the Qur'an as the reference for you. The Qur'an is not the hakim, the judge in the affairs of your life. Either follow your desires or you follow whatever codes or principles that you were raised with, but the Qur'an is the least of your worries when it comes to judging the matters or the affairs in your life. Number 4 is boycotting the pondering and reflecting on the Qur'an. That you don't ponder and reflect on the verses, ponder and reflect on the parables, on the examples that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there are many in the Qur'an, the stories that are in the Qur'an, you don't ponder and reflect on any of that. So that you understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually wants from you. Number 5 is that you boycott or you abandon seeking the healing that is in the Qur'an for the many diseases of the heart. Can you close that door for me, Sheikh? Thank you. You don't seek shifa. You don't seek healing from the Qur'an for the diseases that are in the heart. What are some of the diseases in the heart that the Qur'an can cure? Like what? Envy? The Qur'an cures envy? Okay, I would love to hear how that happens. Break that down for me. I'm not saying it doesn't. I mean, you made the comment. The onus of proof is on the person that made the claim. You made the comment. So tell me how the Qur'an heals the heart from envy. I mean, it does, but I just... Okay, the Qur'an teaches us to be grateful for what we have. Softens the heart. That's a good one. One of the diseases of the heart is a hard heart, right? And the Qur'an softens the heart. When you recite it, when you complete an entire surah, how do you feel after you completed that surah? Wallahu al-Azim, your heart, when sharih, your heart is open, your heart is subhanallah. Yeah. Right? So what are some of the other diseases that the Qur'an heals? The sins of the, what did you say? Oh, sinning. Okay, that's a disease. Well, sinning is not the disease. That's the symptom. So what's the real cause of sinning? Right, your desires. Following your desires. Sinning is not the disease. Sinning is a symptom of the disease, which is following your desires. You know that it's haram, but you do it anyway. Right? So that's following your desires. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the Qur'an, Assalamu alaikum. That's incorrect. Don't follow that. The adhan is at 6:04. We have yet to rectify that, so just be patient with us. That clock is, yeah, it's ruling the masjid, man. We got to fix that. But your desires, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all throughout the Qur'an talks about the desires in a contemptible way, talks about following the desires, gives us examples in the Qur'an of people who followed their desires and what was their end result and how that, where that led them. All right. So the Qur'an also helps to cure the evil eye, magic. Absolutely. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we reveal from the Qur'an what is the shifa'u lima fi sudur, for the diseases that are in the heart. So if you seek a cure for the disease in your heart from other things other than the Qur'an, then that is akin to you abandoning the Qur'an. وَكُلُّ هَذَا دَاخِلٌ فِي قَوْلِهِ. And all of these things, Ibn al-Qayyim said, all of these 5 things that he mentioned are incorporated or in the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Furqan, Surah number 25, ayah 30, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ, and the messenger will say, Ya Rabbi, O my Lord, inna qawmi, indeed my people, ittakhadhu hadha al-Qur'ana mahjura. My people have abandoned this Qur'an. All of these 5 things that he mentioned are in that ayah, where the messenger will say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Yawm al-Qiyamah, O my Lord, indeed my people have abandoned this Qur'an. And we don't want to be those people. We don't want to be the people who abandon the Qur'an. So from this point forward, from today forward, decide how much of the Qur'an you are going to read every single day and stick to it. Make yourself a promise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves commitment. He loves continuity, even if it's small. So even if you say, I'm going to read 10 ayats from the Qur'an every day, not a day goes by except I'm going to pick up the Qur'an and I'm going to read my 10 ayats every day. Then do that. I'm going to read a hizb. I'm going to read one section, half of a juz a day. Or I'm going to read a ruba. I'm going to read a quarter of a juz a day. However you decide to break that down. Make the commitment and stick to it. And throughout your life, as you begin to cut people off, you begin to deny or reject this phone call, reject this, reject that, because you need to finish, the Qur'an will intercede for you Yawm al-Qiyamah because of the sacrifices that you made for it. Jazakallah khayr. We got 2 minutes. Yeah. The Qur'an will intercede for you Yawm al-Qiyamah because of the sacrifices that you made for it. So this is the relationship of the Prophet ﷺ with the Qur'an. Not to mention all of the rewards that come for the person who recite the Qur'an. The Prophet ﷺ said, يُقَالُ لِصَاحِبِ الْقُرْآنِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. It will be said to the person who had a great relationship with the Qur'an on the Day of Judgment, اقرأ وارتقي ورتل كما كنت ترتل في الدنيا فإن منزلك عند آخر آية تقرأها. That on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell the person who had a relationship with the Qur'an, اقرأ, read, وارتقي, and continue to ascend, وَرَتِّل, and recite the Qur'an beautifully like you used to recite it in the dunya, because your last level in Jannah stops at the last ayah you read. Your highest level in Jannah is dependent upon the last ayah that you read. So if you have a relationship with the Qur'an on a regular basis, then this will come to be a benefit for you Yawm al-Qiyamah. 1 minute. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop here, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So this is the relationship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the Qur'an in Ramadan. Tomorrow, no class tomorrow, but Monday, inshallah ta'ala, the class will be at 5:45 because the clock is going to go up an hour. So that means that starting tomorrow, break fast will not be at 6:04, it'll be at 7:04. So everything goes up an hour. Fajr tomorrow will not be at 5:10, it will be at 6:10. So everything goes up an hour from tonight, inshallah ta'ala. So please be mindful of that. But when we come back on Monday, inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk about the relationship of the Prophet ﷺ with food and drink during the month of Ramadan. And we'll also talk about some of the healthy remedies, things that he used ﷺ to remedy some of the diseases that we suffer from in our time. Yes. Speak up, say it again. Things will intercede for you.
So when you say as a child learns Qur'an, they can learn to 7 people. Does the people have to be Muslim?
Do the people have to be Muslim? Good question. She said, based upon a hadith that I mentioned the other day, that if you memorize the Qur'an, you'll be able to intercede for 7 members of your family. She said, does those members of your family have to be Muslim? Absolutely, because a disbeliever is going to the hellfire. Absolutely. But there will be Muslims, as we discussed, that will have to go to the hellfire as well. But if you intercede for them, then you can stop them from going to the hellfire. But they have to be Muslim. Intercession is not for somebody who is a disbeliever. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide our non-Muslim family members to Islam. Allah Shaykh. يا ذا الجلال See you, boy. What's happening with you?
Allah is kind, bro. You know, I was speaking to the other day, speaking to Jamil.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
How's he doing? Y'all was in the same grade, right? Y'all was in the same.
Together, yeah.